9 years, every Tuesday morning without fail, a white refrigerated truck from Harlow Medical Group backed into the service lane behind St. Dunstan's Community Hospital and left behind whatever nobody else wanted to deal with. Broken sterilization units, faulty IV pumps, autoclave machines that had failed inspection 3 times and been quietly pulled from the main facilities, no technician notes, no repair history, just a work order with a deadline, a serial number, and a single line at the bottom. Contracted to Dre Technical Services, no one from Harlow ever called ahead, no one ever asked if the timing was convenient, no one ever said thank you. To the director of Harlow Medical Group, a repair contractor in a rented industrial unit off Dalhousie Street in Brantford, Ontario, was simply a cost-optimized line item, cheaper than their internal biomedical team, reliable enough to keep off the radar, visible by design. But to the man working alone in that unit, the one who ate lunch standing at his workbench because sitting down felt like giving up, those repair orders paid for his daughter's piano lessons, his gas bill, and the particular brand of peanut butter that 7-year-old Iris refused to swap for any other. His name was Daniel Hurst. He was 41 years old and he had the kind of face that told a story before he opened his mouth. Broad across the knuckles, a faint chemical burn on his left forearm from a cleaning solvent incident 4 years back. Nails always short, always clean, because in biomedical repair work, cleanliness wasn't vanity. It was how patients stayed alive. He was average height, brown eyes with the particular tiredness that doesn't come from one bad night but from years of interrupted sleep and 5:45 a.m. school runs. He kept his dark hair slightly longer than he probably should have, because Iris liked it, and because some battles weren't worth having with a 7-year-old who had already lost too much. Her mother, Claire, had died of a brain aneurysm 2.5 years earlier. Here one morning, gone by afternoon. No warning, no goodbye, no chance to prepare. Iris had been 4. She remembered her mother the way children remember things, in flashes, in feelings, in the specific smell of a certain shampoo that Daniel still kept in the bathroom cabinet and couldn't bring himself to throw out. After Claire died, Daniel did what people in survival mode do. He simplified, he cut down to the essentials. He turned the spare bedroom of their rented house into a small secondary workspace for late nights when he couldn't sleep. He learned to French braid hair badly and then less badly. He packed lunches the night before. He said yes to every contract that came through, because saying no meant the lights might go out, and the lights could not go out. Harlow Medical Group had been sending him equipment for 9 years, since before Claire died, since before Iris existed, since he was a younger and more optimistic version of himself who still believed professional relationships eventually became human ones. They hadn't. The work orders came, he fixed the equipment. The invoices were paid, usually on time, occasionally late with no explanation. And the white truck came back the following Tuesday with something new to break his week. What Harlow didn't know, or didn't care to know, was what Daniel was actually doing with those machines. The autoclave units he rebuilt from scratch, replacing heating elements and pressure seals that should have been replaced years earlier. IV pumps he recalibrated so precisely that the equipment, when it was eventually resold or redistributed, performed better than it had when it left the factory. There were diagnostic units he had repaired that were now functioning in 2 rural health clinics in northern Ontario, equipment that other biomedical contractors had declared unrepairable. He didn't advertise this, he didn't invoice for the extra hour, he just fixed things until they worked, because that was what fixing things meant to him. Anything less felt like lying. Harlow Medical Group sent broken equipment. Daniel Hurst sent back things that worked. For 9 years, no one at Harlow noticed the difference. The woman who ran Harlow Medical Group was named Patricia Wende, 44 years old, Rhodes Scholar, MBA from Rotman. She had built Harlow from a mid-sized Ontario medical supplier into a nationally recognized healthcare procurement company in under 12 years. She was profiled in Business in Vancouver, cited in 3 federal healthcare policy reviews, and invited to speak at conferences, where she talked about operational efficiency with the calm certainty of someone who had never been wrong about anything important. She had not, in 9 years of sending equipment to Dre Technical Services, ever looked up who Daniel Hurst was. He was a vendor. Vendors were managed by her procurement coordinator. The procurement coordinator sent work orders. Work orders generated invoices. Invoices were paid. The process worked. There was nothing to review. That was the logic, and it held, right up until it didn't. The problem began in March, the way most institutional crises begin, quietly, in a corner no one was watching, until it wasn't quiet anymore. A batch of infusion devices Harlow had sourced from a new European supplier began showing calibration errors in the field. Not catastrophic, not yet, but the kind of inconsistency that makes hospital biomedical departments nervous and compliance officers start drafting emails. 1 device flagged, then 3. 11 across 4 hospital systems in Ontario and British Columbia, Health Canada opened a review. Harlow's internal biomedical team, which Patricia had quietly reduced by 30% 18 months earlier as part of a margin improvement initiative, did not have the capacity to assess the scope of the problem, revalidate the affected units, and manage the regulatory response simultaneously. They were 3 people covering what had previously been a team of 8. Patricia hired 2 external consultants. They produced a report in 11 days that was expensive, thorough, and ultimately unhelpful. They could identify the problem, they could not fix it at the speed Health Canada required. Her legal team advised her the exposure was significant if the review expanded. Her board chair called twice in 1 week, which he had never done before. 2 hospital procurement directors who had been Harlow's clients for 7 years quietly put their renewal contracts on hold pending resolution. Patricia Wende, for the first time in a long time, did not know what to do next. It was her procurement coordinator who finally mentioned Daniel. Not because she had been holding back, but because it genuinely hadn't occurred to anyone that a single contractor in Brantford might be relevant to a national compliance crisis. She pulled the service records almost as an afterthought. What she found stopped her mid-sentence. 9 years of repair logs, hundreds of units, a failure on return rate of less than 2% against an industry average of roughly 14%. Equipment that other contractors had written off, returned to service and still running. Notes in the margins of work orders, handwritten, which almost nobody did anymore, explaining not just what he had repaired but why it had failed, and what design or usage patterns were likely to cause the same failure again. She printed 6 DVDs of those logs and read them at her kitchen table on a Sunday night. Then she looked up Dre Technical Services. The website was functional but bare, a contact form, a phone number, a short paragraph about biomedical equipment repair and preventative maintenance, a logo that looked like it had been made in 2009 and never updated. She called the number the next morning before she called her lawyer. Daniel picked up on the 3rd ring, which surprised her. She had expected voicemail. She introduced herself. There was a pause on his end, not hostile, just measured, and then he said he knew who she was. She explained the situation directly. The infusion device issue, the Health Canada review, the timeline pressure, the gap in her internal team's capacity. She said she needed an independent biomedical assessment and remediation plan, and she said she had spent the weekend looking at 9 years of his work and believed he was qualified to lead it. Daniel listened without interrupting. He was sitting at his workbench. Iris was at school. The coffee beside him had gone cold 15 minutes ago. When Patricia finished, he didn't answer immediately. He looked at the wall where he had pinned Iris's latest drawing, a horse with disproportionately large eyes and a name tag that read Cloud, and he thought about what kind of answer a reasonable person would give. He could say no, he had reason to. 9 years of anonymous Tuesday morning deliveries without a single phone call, a single acknowledgement, a single human conversation about the work he had quietly done for them. He was well within his rights to tell Patricia Wende that he was at capacity and wish her luck. But there were hospitals waiting on that equipment. There were patients connected to infusion devices in wards across 2 provinces. There were nurses and pharmacists and biomedical techs who had nothing to do with Patricia's procurement decisions and everything to do with whether those devices were safe. Daniel thought about that for a moment. Then he said he would come and take a look. Not a contract, not a commitment, a look. He asked if Thursday worked. He drove to Harlow's Mississauga facility in his 2014 Silverado, Iris's booster seat still buckled in the back seat, an extra jacket on the passenger floor in case the building was cold. He arrived 7 minutes early and waited in the parking lot rather than going in, because he was not someone who liked to be the first person standing at a reception desk. The Harlow offices were what he had expected. Glass and brushed steel and a lobby that communicated success before you had a chance to form your own opinion. A receptionist who smiled with professional warmth and asked if he could spell his last name. A boardroom with a view of the QEW and a table long enough to seat 20 people, with only 4 chairs occupied when he walked in. Patricia Wende was not what he had expected. She was composed, certainly. She had the posture and the vocabulary of someone who had spent years in rooms like this one. But she was also visibly tired in a way that her composure didn't quite cover. There were shadows under her eyes. She had a coffee cup she kept moving from one hand to the other without drinking from it. She thanked him for coming. She introduced her compliance director and her head of procurement. She slid a summary document across the table. Daniel picked it up. He read it. He asked 3 questions that made the compliance director reach for his own folder to double-check an answer, and 1 question that Patricia admitted, without flinching, she didn't know the answer to. He asked to see the equipment. They walked him through the warehouse. He examined 6 of the flagged infusion units. He asked for the original technical documentation from the European supplier. He asked for the incoming inspection records, and when the procurement coordinator said they hadn't been doing unit-level incoming inspections on this product line, he simply nodded and wrote something in the small notebook he carried. He spent 4 hours at that facility. He ate a sandwich from the vending machine in the break room because someone had offered to order lunch, and he'd said it wasn't necessary. He worked quietly and methodically, the way he always worked, and the Harlow staff who passed through the warehouse during those 4 hours found themselves slowing down to watch without quite realizing they were doing it. Before he left, he told Patricia what he had found. A calibration drift in the pressure regulation mechanism, inconsistent across units but predictable once you understood the manufacturing tolerance the supplier was working within. Fixable. Not quickly, not cheaply, but fixable with a systematic approach and the right documentation trail for Health Canada. He said he could put together a remediation protocol by the following Monday. Patricia asked what he needed. He said he needed the full device inventory, the supplier's engineering contact, and a workspace at the facility where he could work without being interrupted every 20 minutes. She said yes to all 3 before he finished the sentence. He also said, and he said it without confrontation, just as a fact, that he would need a proper contract this time, not a work order, an actual contract with scope defined, timelines agreed, and his rate reviewed because the rate he had been accepting for 9 years was below market and they both knew it. Patricia looked at him for a moment, then she said that was fair. She said it like someone who had just realized, slightly too late, the weight of what that word implied. Next 6 weeks were the most demanding Daniel had worked since the early years, when he was building Dre Technical out of a borrowed van and a set of tools he'd bought at an estate sale. He was at the Harlow facility most days by 7:30, back in Brantford by 5 to pick up Iris, home for dinner, back online after she was in bed to review documentation and draft the protocol updates Health Canada was requesting. Iris adapted, as she always did, with a pragmatic flexibility that both impressed and broke his heart a little. She started going to her friend Maya's house after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She informed Daniel with the authority of someone who had thought it through, that Maya's mom made better quesadillas than he did but that his soup was better, and this seemed to settle the comparative analysis to her satisfaction. At the Harlow facility, Daniel worked alongside a junior biomedical technician named Owen who had 3 years of experience and a genuine aptitude that had been underdeveloped by a team structure that didn't have time to teach. Daniel spent more time explaining than he expected to. He didn't mind. Owen asked good questions, which was rarer than people assumed, Patricia observed, more than she participated. She was not a technical person, she knew that, and she didn't pretend otherwise, but she was a precise observer, and she watched Daniel work with the particular attention of someone recalibrating a long-held assumption. What she saw was not what she had expected from a sole contractor biomedical tech in a rented industrial unit in Brantford. She saw someone who could read equipment the way other people read people, who could tell by the sound of a mechanism whether the fault was in the hardware or the software or the usage pattern that had stressed both past their threshold, who explained complex technical failures to non-technical staff in language that was clear without being condescending, who never, not once in 6 weeks, raised his voice, performed impatience, or took credit for something Owen had contributed. She also saw someone who kept a photo on his workbench. A little girl in a yellow raincoat, standing in front of what looked like a lake somewhere in Muskoka, laughing at something outside the frame. He never mentioned her at the facility, but he was always packed up and out the door by 4:50. The remediation was completed in week 5. The Health Canada submission went in on a Thursday. The review was formally closed 12 days later with a compliance confirmation and no regulatory action against Harlow. 2 of the hospital procurement directors who had paused their renewals called within a week of the announcement. Both contracts were reinstated. The morning the Health Canada letter arrived, Patricia came to the warehouse where Daniel was finishing his documentation and put the letter on the workbench beside his notebook. He read it. He set it down. She said she owed him something more than a contract payment. He said the contract payment was fine. She said that wasn't what she meant. There was a quiet in the warehouse that was different from their usual working quiet. Owen had gone to the supply room. The fluorescent lights hummed. Patricia said she had been thinking about the 9 years, about what she had looked at in those service records, about the fact that she had never once, in nearly a decade of him doing work that had quietly protected her company from problems she hadn't known existed, made a phone call. Not one. She said she didn't have a good explanation for that. She said she had been operating at a level of abstraction from her own supply chain that had been, in retrospect, both professionally reckless and personally indefensible. Daniel listened to this. He thought about 9 years of Tuesday mornings. He thought about the invoices that came back marked approved. Standard rate without a single question about what the work had actually involved. He thought about the autoclave unit he had spent 11 hours on in February of 2021, during a snowstorm, when Iris had a fever and he'd set her up on the couch with a blanket and the iPad so he could finish the repair on time because the deadline was the deadline regardless of the weather or the child or the fact that nobody at Harlow would ever know what that night had cost him. He thought about all of that and then he said he appreciated her saying so. He meant it, not fully, but enough. Patricia said she wanted to propose something, not to compensate for the past. She understood that wasn't how this worked, but going forward, Harlow was rebuilding its biomedical capacity. She wanted to do it properly this time, not by reducing a team to a number on a margin report. She was looking for someone to consult on how that team should be structured, what the technical standards should be, and how to build the kind of institutional knowledge into their processes that had been living, for 9 years, entirely inside one contractor's head. She said she thought that person should be Daniel, if he was willing. The arrangement would be flexible. He could keep Dre technical. He could work remotely when remote made sense. A schedule would be built around his life, not the other way around, because she had learned something in 6 weeks that she should have understood 9 years ago. Some people's value to you is so disproportionate to how you've treated them that the only honest response is to start over with better terms. Daniel looked at the photo of Iris on the workbench. Yellow raincoat, that lake. The laugh. He said he had some conditions. Patricia said she expected he did. He said he needed the flexibility to be at school pickup when it mattered, which was most of the time. He said he needed his rate to reflect the actual scope, not a number inherited from a contract that had been set in 2015 and never revisited. He said he needed to be consulted, not just informed, which meant if Harlow was making sourcing decisions that had biomedical implications, he was in the conversation before the decision, not after. Patricia said yes. He said he'd need that in writing. She said she'd have the contract drafted by Friday. He nodded. He picked up his notebook, he capped his pen, then he said one more thing. He said that Owen had good instincts and not enough opportunity, and that if Harlow was serious about rebuilding the team properly, they should start by giving Owen a real role with real responsibility and a salary that reflected what he was actually contributing. Patricia said she would look into it. He said he would take the consulting arrangement on the condition that Owen's situation was addressed first. She looked at him for a moment, the particular look of someone encountering, close up, a quality they had not adequately accounted for. She said done. That Friday Daniel picked Iris up from school himself. No Tuesday arrangement, no Maya's house. He was standing at the school gate at 3:15 with a coffee from the Tim Hortons 2 blocks over, watching the doors, the way he liked to. Iris came out with her backpack half unzipped and a painting rolled under her arm, still slightly damp. She said without preamble that she had painted a horse and that it looked bad but that her teacher said the colors were interesting. Daniel said he was sure the colors were excellent. She asked if he was done with the big job. He said mostly. She asked what that meant. He said it meant things were going to be a little more settled from here, that he'd still be working hard but differently. Less like putting out fires, more like building something that didn't need so many fires put out. Iris considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. She said that sounded better. He said it was. They walked to the truck. He buckled her in around the painting, which she refused to put in the back because she wanted to watch it dry. He started the engine. The radio came on, something low and country, the station he'd never gotten around to changing since Claire used to put it on during long drives. He left it on. Later that evening, after dinner and the bath and the 3 books minimum negotiation that Iris always pushed to 4 if he wasn't paying attention, he sat at his workbench in the spare room and looked at the due contract draft on his laptop. It was everything he had asked for: scope defined, rate corrected, consultation rights explicit, flexibility built in. He thought about Patricia's face when she'd said she didn't have a good explanation for 9 years of silence. He had believed her. That was the thing. He had actually believed her, because the look on her face was the particular expression of someone arriving, too late but genuinely, at an honest accounting of themselves. People could do that. It didn't undo the 9 years, but it counted for something that she hadn't tried to reframe it or minimize it or redirect it into a conversation about moving forward. She had just sat with it for a moment and said it plainly. He signed the contract, not because everything was resolved, or because the past had been cleaned up and filed away, But because Iris needed stability more than he needed the satisfaction of refusal. Because Owen deserved the chance someone hadn't given Daniel when he'd needed it. Because the right thing to do, most of the time, wasn't the dramatic thing or the satisfying thing. It was the thing that took the most honesty and the least performance. He had learned that from Claire, actually. She used to say that the easiest version of integrity was the kind you only had to use once. The real kind was the kind you had to choose again every Tuesday morning when the truck showed up and nobody said thank you. He closed the laptop. In the hallway he could hear Iris talking to herself in the dark the way she did sometimes before she fell asleep, narrating something, a story she was making up, her voice small and unguarded and completely unaware that anyone could hear. He sat very still and listened for a while. Some things don't need fixing, some things are already exactly what they should be, and the only thing required of you is to be present enough to notice.